Let's understand animations in CSS. First of all, let's create a div that we can animate. And now let's give that div a width and a height of 100 pixels. And let's give it a background color of yellow, for example. Now we are going to save that, and now let's animate that div. We can animate by using the add keyframes property, and then we have to give it an identifier that is basically the name of the animation, and we can, for example, say that we want to have the name move, for example. Now there are several options to really animate something, and the first one would be to use from, then opening and closing brackets, and then the second keyword would be to and opening and closing brackets. And inside of the from clause, you define the initial state, and in the to clause, you define the end state of the animation. So we could, for example, say that we want to use transform, translate, which basically just moves the element into a certain direction. Let's use translate x and say we want to start at translate x 0 pixels. So we start from the initial position because we're not translating at all. And then we are going to translate x, for example, 200 pixels. So we move our element 200 pixels to the right. And obviously we need to use the transform property. So like this, it should basically work. Now we need to define the transition property for our div element. And there are several different properties to do so. And the first one is the animation name, since we need to define which animation we want to use. And our animation name is move, because this is the name we gave to our animation. So let's give our animation name the name move, or define the animation name move right here for animation minus name. The second thing we need to do is define an animation duration. And we can do so by using animation minus duration. And let's say we want to have an animation of around 4 seconds. And as you can see, it's already animated. It goes from left to right, so it basically does exactly what we defined. There's also an option to define an animation iteration count. Right now you saw the animation basically just played one time, but that was actually it. But maybe we want the animation to play maybe forever, for example. And we can do so by using animation iteration count. So let's do animation iteration count, and the only option you might ever want to use is probably infinite. So you can use infinite right here, and as you can see, now our animation will repeat forever basically. The next property that might be useful is the animation direction. And you can, for example, choose normal, which is just a default value, so that might not be something that you want to type out. But you can also do reverse or alternate reverse, for example. So you could, for example, do reverse, and now the animation will play from the end to the start, basically. And alternate reverse basically just means you first play the animation in the normal direction, and then you reverse the animation. So that would actually look like this. You can also define an animation timing function, for example, and let's say we want to have an ease in out, for example, and we can do so by choosing it from here. You can also use ease in, ease out. So that is pretty similar to transitions basically. So let's choose ease in out. So the next property that might be useful is the animation delay, which just defines, as the name already implies, a delay. So you can, for example, say I want to do an animation, but I want to have a delay of 3 seconds, for example. And let's remove some of those properties because we really don't need them right now. And as you can see now, we are waiting for 3 seconds, and after 3 seconds, the animation is basically playing. So that is the delay. And now let's take a look at the last property, which is the animation fill mode. And if you set the animation fill mode to forward, this basically means take the animation and you're going to stop the animation at the last frame. And you will see the difference once I save this file and the animation is going to play. So as you can see, animation is playing, normal playing, but now the animation, so the box in our case, stops at the last frame, and now the box will stay here. So if you want to start from here, for example, once the user loads the page, and then you want to animate your box, for example, right here, and then you'll go to the bottom, whatever you want to do, the box will basically stop at the end. So in this case, it will be the bottom, and the user will see the box for the rest of the time at the bottom. There's also the option backward. And this is something that is really useful if your initial state is basically different from the state your box is usually in. So our usual box is basically right here. But our initial state for the animation is right here, if you want to say so. And if we want to use that initial state or display that initial state before the animation basically starts to play, we'll have to use backwards. So let me remove this animation fill mode for now. And as you can see, we're starting at the left. Our animation starts here though, and once the delay is over, our cube jumps to the start of the animation and then goes to the right. Now if we would add our animation fill mode to backwards again, it will stay here at the start of the animation during our animation delay time, and then it will move. And now you can also say I want to use both, so I want to use backwards and forward. So we're going to start at the start of our animation, and we're going to stop at the last keyframe of our animation. I know some of this stuff might be really confusing, and again, you might not really use this animation fill method or fill mode too often, but if you want to use it, you know how it works now. There's also a shorthand property, and I really recommend everyone to just use the shorthand property because that is a lot faster and also a lot more clear in my opinion. So you're just going to type animation, and Visual Studio Code already indicates the properties that you have to fill in. So we can use a name, move for example. We can set a duration of 5 seconds for example. We could say we want an ease in, out, for example, delay of 0 seconds, so you can just leave that away, and we want an iteration count of infinite, and that is something you will probably do a lot of the times. And directional fill mode, you'll probably never use that or almost never, so we can just delete that. Because I mean, if you wanted to reverse an animation, why wouldn't you just type out the reversed order from the beginning? Like, doesn't really make too much sense to me, but if you want to use it, use it. And now we basically have this animation here, and it will loop forever. And this is something that you might use a lot of the times if you are working with animations. Now there's also a different option. We only used from and to right now, but we could do the same by using 0% and 100%, for example. And now we have an animation that works exactly the same, but we use 0% and 100%. But we could also say, okay, this is like 25%. And if you want to create animations with a lot of keyframes, you should definitely use percentages. So now we could also say 50%, we want to transform, we want to translate. Now we do not just want to translate X, we also want to translate Y. So we translate to 200 pixels on the x-axis and let's say to 200 pixels on the y-axis. So let's save that. We're going to the right, we're going to the bottom, and now we're going back to the top. Let's say we're going to 75% and we want to have a translation to the left again. So we're just going to use this translate statement. We remove the first one and we obviously need to add transform. And we need to add translate 0 to the x-axis. So we're going to the left now. As you can see, we're going to the right, to the bottom, to the left, and now we're going back up to the top. And maybe it makes more sense to start at 0 right here, because that would make the animation look a little bit better. And as you can see, that is how you can animate something inside of CSS with just a few properties.